Fletch here, producer and owner of the Asleep at Work Network, and I'm very excited to welcome you to the Hurdle the Line podcast. If you like what you hear, head to the links in the description, find out how you can get in touch and support the podcast, get in touch and support the Asleep at Work Network, and interact with our amazing hosts. But without further ado, more importantly, lads, it's over to you.
Hello and welcome to another episode of Hurdle the Line. We are back for our third episode, and I'm back for episode 3 after missing the last one. We've got a few things that we're going to be going through this week. We've got the 2-minute grills where each of our guys are going to be put to the test to see how their debating skills are, see what they can argue for and against on certain topics, some interesting ones and some weird ones, shall we say. And then we have a little segment towards the end around that we'll reveal a bit later. So I suppose first of all, welcome everyone who can make it. How are we all doing?
Good.
Great. Happy birthday, Sam.
Thank
to our
you.
host.
Thank you.
Happy birthday.
Thank you all. Yeah, slowly making my way through the 30s now, which is not seems to be making any difference, to be honest. I'm just getting older and still feeling really old. But alas, anyway, we'll go on to our first one, which is the 2-minute grills. So what we've done is we've just come up with a few different ideas, a few different sort of topics that we're going to debate, and we're all each going to have a couple of minutes to have a go at them, argue for and against, and then we'll just have a quick sort of vote as to who we think, just a little bit of fun vote, see who we think made the best argument. Obviously, guys, when you're listening, if you want to make your own votes and comment at a later date, then by all means do so. But we'll start with the first debate, which is between David and Tom. Should the UK be given an official Super Bowl game? We'll start with the 4 in this case. So we'll start with you, David. We'll start with why we should have a UK-based Super Bowl.
I'm all for having a Super Bowl international level. I just don't know if we're ready for it yet. But I'm all for having a Super Bowl game maybe 5-10 years down the line. I think we need to be an established, as call it, international perspective of the NFL. But I'm definitely all for it. I think the fans have shown that their devotion for the NFL, for turning up for the sellout games in London and Tottenham, and etc. So I do feel that from an NFL point of view and from a UK point of view, and not just UK but mainly Europe as well, because you'll be getting fans across Europe that are coming to the UK Super Bowl. So. Yeah, I definitely think we deserve to have a Super Bowl in the future.
Brilliant, thank you for that, David. Tom, what do you think? What's your argument for not having a Super Bowl in the UK?
Well, I mean, it is kind of America's sport, with the NFL. Obviously, it's great that it's growing internationally, but just a few stats for you. 202.4 million viewers watched all or part of the last Super Bowl in the US, with an average of 123 million people. So that's an increase of 7% from the previous year. Just the history of the game, the fact that it was built in the US. That it's so special within the US calendar as well. That it's such a big event that it would be very strange for it to be held somewhere else. The NFL is steeped in tradition, and to have it moved from America would just be really strange. I think it could happen in the future, of course, but I think just how many people view it in America, and how many passionate fans that there are there, that the pinnacle of the footballing calendar should stay in the States.
I sensed the lack of passion in that argument, Tom.
I do think as I suppose as a UK based podcast, we are a little bit maybe biased towards the idea of wanting to have a Super Bowl in the UK. I do think there are plenty of arguments, I think, for and against this. I think if you ask this same question to a US based podcast or US based NFL fans, they'd probably spit in your face and completely disagree with the idea. But I think it's one of those sort of potential things to happen in the future. We've seen other events across the world, other big sort of sporting events be held across different countries. So I suppose there is always going to be an argument there as to, well, why not the Super Bowl?
Can I throw a question there to Tom and David, I guess? If the UK was to not get a Super Bowl, do you think we should at least get something like, say, a Pro Bowl games instead? Do you think that would be so the UK would still get a major calendar event, but not quite the Super Bowl? Would that be an acceptable, or is it? Or for you, David, is it give us Super Bowl or give us nothing?
I'm all for a playoff game, for example, but then you've got to take into factor it's going to be a home game, so you're taking away that home factor from the actual playoff team. So, I mean, like you say, it's hard. It's either a Super Bowl or nothing, because you don't want to take away that home field advantage from a playoff contender having to travel to the UK to host a playoff game. Pro Bowl, I personally don't like it. In the last couple of years, they have recently tried to change it up a bit and put a bit more fun aspect into it. Like, where you've got the Manning versus the brothers versus and they're doing a bit of flag football, and how it used to be a couple of years back, but then it kind of went into a degree of like a bit of boredness, and it was just like pointless event. Do we want to see that kind of thing moving over to the UK? I mean, personally, I don't. For me, it's Super Bowl or nothing.
Yeah, I kind of agree that I mean, it'd be interesting with a playoff game, but at the same time, yeah, as you say, the experience in the home crowd that you get for a playoff game, that would just be totally different if it was somewhere else. I could see them doing some sort of Pro Bowl games, but I think kind of the international series that they have at the moment with the games over, in at Wembley or at Tottenham Hotspur Stadium, like those are quite good at the moment. It'd be interesting if they could like extend the international series like a bit or something, so that there's more games in a year. That would be a good way of building sport more. But no, I just don't see. Yeah, that's it really.
I think it's this again. It's a lovely little segue. I mean, talking about the fact we're going to have, the idea of potentially more games coming to the UK and to other international places. They've had games in Germany, in Mexico, and looking at other things like that. So yeah, Brazil, I think this year as well. So maybe having more international games might be a good way into it. And I suppose this sort of leads quite nicely into our next question, which is between myself and Chapman, which is, should the UK have should there be a franchise introduced to the UK, or a UK franchise? Chapman, if you want to start off with this one, so arguing against this, and we'll take it from there.
And just a reminder to our listeners that we divvied these up not based on preference, but just on Fletch's, our producer's, choosing. But
I'm just going to throw out that Oli was on with me yesterday as I drew these. These are random draw generators.
Yep.
This I'm not trying to start any international. Chapman, you did a great job last week for kind of building those bridges. I don't want to. It's not intentionally bringing you to tear them down. Sorry.
So with that preference, look, let's talk about this from a more practical standpoint. I think the international series is great, and I've already waxed poetically about that on previous episodes. But the real grind of an entire season, 9 to 8 games, being at home here in London for one franchise, I think, and the logistics that would be involved, both with that franchise having to go back and forth to the United States, and then also the amount of teams that would have to come here. I think that's a really difficult thing for players in terms of rest and in terms of recovery. I'm sure we can get all the flights and all that stuff figured out because they do it all the time in the States. But I think the practical implications of it and the scheduling. Also, it'd probably mean we'd have to have 2 new teams. And the other thing, having lived here for 8 years, everyone has their teams now. So again, a London, let's just go ahead and say it'd probably be a London-based team, as it's the largest city in the UK. It would be everyone's second favorite team because everyone on here who's UK-based already has a team that they love. And again, obviously, the Jaguars would be, if they weren't going to create an expansion team, they would be the most likely to move over. And still, what does it garner you? I'm not really sure. And I think the biggest thing is too. We had a failed EuroLeague that worked for, it was around for a few years, and I'm not sure why we don't try to do that first before building a whole actual NFL franchise. Like, see if you can get a summer league here or some sort of a second league in Europe between Germany, Spain, the UK, maybe grab a couple of other countries and just see if that can work again before moving an entire $1 billion, or creating a $1 billion franchise. Also, I would say with the expansion, we have 32 teams. It's a nice number. 34 starts to get a little weird, I think. And then the divisions are all going to be off. And I just don't think it makes sense for a lot of reasons, but most of all practical ones. I'll cede my time.
Thank you, Chapman. Yeah, this is an interesting one for me. I mean, I will obviously argue for it, and like I said, it was a random pick. I do think that there is enough in the UK at what we've seen over the last few years, similar to what we were saying about the Super Bowl. I think there's enough of a fan base in order to create a team here, or bring a franchise over. I think, yes, there's obviously going to be logistical issues, but I mean, I think the pros of how you're going to introduce a team in terms of the money-making element that will come with it, the NFL is always about sort of trying to expand and make that sort of money and to expand the product, I suppose, of the NFL. And I think that they've done well so far with the international games. I don't see why they couldn't, increase that. I mean, yes, okay, there is a lot of issues with that would have come to it, and there probably would be a significant cost. But I do also think that there are a lot of significant advantages. I think, yes, you could probably say that there's arguments for teams having to travel. They already, I mean, for teams that already travel, 3, 4, 5 hours across the United States, the ones on the East Coast, it's going to be less of an issue because they only have to travel, maybe a couple of extra hours. And I think, with the talk of there being potentially an 18th week, or I suppose, an 18th week, or a 19th week, I suppose, really, and further on, there could be the elements of creating a few more gaps for teams to have rest, to allow that travel time, to allow teams to be able to come over, maybe do it where they have, instead of coming over and doing one game, they have their back-to-back games over here. Or, obviously there is a lot of issues with it, but I do think that with all the work that they've already done with getting the international games in, I think that there is the ability to be able to have a UK franchise within the NFL. Whether that, becomes, like we say, looking at bringing in one or more teams into Europe and integrating it that way. But I do think that there's certainly the appetite for it. But whether, like you say, I mean, there is obviously always going to be logistics with creating any new team.
And to quote the great film franchise Jurassic Park, We ask just because you can do something, but they forget to ask, but should we? And should we move a franchise here? I don't know. Premier League is massively popular in the United States. I would get up at 6 a.m. in LA to go to an Arsenal bar to watch games. But we're not talking about moving a Premier League team to the United States either. And that is a purely UK, and it's obviously massively globally popular. I just don't see the point. I don't know what it gets us. That's my question. I wouldn't question the fact that we have very loyal and enough fans to support a team, but just what does it do for us? I'm not sure it doesn't make me any more excited about the NFL. But again, that's just me.
Do you both think it would be something that owners would vote for or against if it did come down to it? Do you think it would be like a popular thing amongst NFL owners, or do you think they would agree with Chapman on this one?
I personally think that they would agree with Chapman. I think that I think that probably my biggest argument, I know I'm arguing against myself here now, but at the end of the day, it's the National Football League. It's a national thing. It's a US sport. And yes, okay, it'd be fun having a UK version or a EU version, but that's what I think it should be. I think we should have like the CFL or the XFL, just another type that is still it's still sort of linked to the NFL. We still, maybe introduce other games at those that come over from the NFL, maybe sort of broaden that horizon. But yeah, they just need to be. I think it's baby steps. I think we're probably thinking throwing in a team into a US based sport probably wouldn't work.
Yeah, I think from a second point of view from your back and forth from the for and against, I get that having an NFL team in the UK will probably bring in marketing venues for the NFL. TV rights will go sky high as well. But the against part is about who's going to want to come and be part of a UK if there's two teams. What caliber of players are you going to bring to a franchise? Is it going to be similar to what we see in the UFL level? Is it very amateur? Family wise as well, you got to think of the guys that they have to transfer everything over from the United States, move everything over to the United Kingdom. It's just not. I don't think it's feasible at the moment. And like you say, if it went up to a vote, I'd probably be against it because I think we've got it right as it is now. Keep the international series as they are. I just think it's a massive step forward into creating, like you say, two franchises in the UK. But that's my personal view, I think.
Just to kind of throw off the back of that, if you think about it, a lot of players who say move to, let's say, LA, and they're from, I don't know, they come from North Carolina, and their families, a lot of them, their families still live in North Carolina. They get an apartment with a teammate for 3-4 months throughout the year. Who's to say that? I'm to play devil's advocate and jump behind Sam here, because I'm about to throw one back at you there, Sam. So it's doable, and it's already being done. Moving so many thousand miles away from families is already being done now, and I think, is it going to be all that much more expensive getting an apartment in London than it is getting an apartment in LA? But to throw one there at Sam, and I guess actually to the rest of the group, it's something I think about a lot. We see the demand for tickets here every year. We get 3 games, 1 at Wembley, 2 at Spurs. Now, we wouldn't have an issue selling out 3 games at Wembley, despite the fact that, with 2 games at Tottenham, that takes 54,000 seats, I think it is, on average, tickets away than playing 3 games at Wembley. We know for a fact that we would not struggle to get 3 lots of 90,000 people over 3 weeks to a game. But what I kind of throw to you there, Sam, is that's while it's a novelty. 1 week we're getting Derek Kemry playing. We're getting, I don't know, the Titans versus the Saints, say, for example. We're getting one. It's a different matchup every week. We're getting different players every week, and it's a novelty, and we already have our teams there. If the same franchise played 9 times a year at Wembley, would people be as willing to take, like, because you think as well, for someone like, I don't know, myself and Shaun, who were up north, for someone like David, who's in Gibraltar, maybe one of those games is easy to get to, we can do it, but 9 times a year to travel down to Wembley to watch a team that I don't really care about, and then that might mean that, okay, I can go to the Hippodrome in London, but I'm probably going to miss a good chunk of the Sunday night games there of my own team. So I guess what I'm kind of asking here is, in a roundabout ways, without the kind of the novelty value to the team, do you think you would still see, say, 62,000 people 9 times a year in 5 years' time? Maybe for one season it might work, but in 5 years would it still be working?
I do think you would. I don't think you'd necessarily get your... Obviously, you'd have some season ticket holders, maybe, if it was, say, London-based people who were solely into the NFL, weren't into any of the sports. I think there would be the sales would be there. Whether you'd maybe get 90,000 people for, I don't know, if we were sort of the worst team in the NFL versus potentially someone who's just as bad, but that happens in every sport. When a team isn't doing well, they lose a fan base. They do start to lose a fan base. We've seen it with Jacksonville. I mean, when I went over to America, I was looking at Jacksonville Atlanta tickets, and it was so easy to get tickets there because no one wanted to go. But when a team starts doing well, I think there is the possibility that they could start. And I think you look at every single year that we have with the NFL at the moment in London, there's hundreds of thousands of people trying to get tickets, whether that's true on the Ticketmaster queue list or not. There are hundreds of thousands of people trying to get tickets. If you know that you could potentially get to 2 or 3 games that year, I think there's enough people that would want to go to maybe 2 or 3 games a year. It would probably, I think, initially be harder to get like a fan base in terms of a team that's like a home field advantage that we say. Then maybe that might become a little bit more difficult. And like you say, probably people coming all the way down from Scotland or like Gibraltar, like with David, probably would be less. It'd be less of a pull, but I think there's enough people that live in and around. I mean, if you brought imagine sort of a game like, I don't know, say that there was a London-based team, London Bulldogs or whatever, and they were playing the 49ers one year. The amount of Niners fans we have here that would travel down to that game, it would feel like a bit like what it is with the Niners going to LA and playing at the SoFi, what we see every single year where it's just purely red. It would be like that. I think you'd have teams going to what you'd have fan bases going to watch your team as well as the odd fans who don't. So I think you could easily fill out the stadium. But yeah, I think there's although obviously I'm arguing for this, my biggest thing is the fact that it is technically the NFL. It's a US-based sport. It's the National Football League. To introduce a international team into that, it doesn't work. I don't think it'd work. So that'd be my argument for it, is that you create, and I suppose another point, very briefly, is we have NFL amateur teams in England. Why not build those up and allow them to become a bit more like a professional team? We have, I think Manchester have, there's a team in Manchester that play.
And we're back-to-back national champions. Thank you. Just what I had there. Back-to-back national champions.
So I think, and I think one of my someone I know actually plays in one of those teams as well. So I think you would need to have, they need to look at that first and look at building up an NFL equivalent in Europe before they then start introducing teams. Because I think you'd have to, at the very minimum, have 2 divisions, in my opinion, to have it so that it was equal, in my opinion. But I do think there's enough there, I think, for it to be a discussion for the future. Anyway, we've kind of gone on to that.
Just really quick there, Sat, by the way, I think that's an amazing point, something I wholeheartedly believe in. And on that note, just really quick, if you're listening to it as of the week that this came out, on Sunday, the British American Football Association adult contact season starts on Sunday. Most teams offer free entry to go and watch the games. Please head down and go and watch some of those games. Manchester Titans, unfortunately, are one of the few that do charge, but the ones that do charge are extremely affordable for a game of football. That's 3-4 hours of entertainment, and so yeah, it's the British American Football Associations. That's a fun word to say. Their league starts in the next few days. Please consider going and supporting your local team. Go to the BAFA website, find your local club, and go and show them some love.
Bro, thank you for that. So I suppose we'll now move off the topic of the UK and go into a slightly different topic, one that I have quite strong opinions on, actually. So it'll be interesting to see what the guys have got to say about this one. So the topic for this one is, should divisional winners be given an automatic playoff spot? We'll start with Shaun, I think.
Yeah.
On this one,
No, I was just going to say, do you want me to go first? Yeah. I feel a bit under pressure now that you've got strong feelings about it. I feel like I'm going to upset you already, which is not a good start. But so I had a good think about it today, and weirdly, it was kind of the first time I've ever really thought about it more than like a passing thought. So I was trying to think of kind of the reasons why this would be a good idea, and the overwhelming, the biggest one is definitely to increase the quality of the playoff games that we get. I mean, I think everyone can probably agree that we get some pretty poor teams that make the playoffs, and definitely the Giants are not included in that 100%. You know, we deserve to be there whenever we make it. But over the years, we do get some pretty poor teams with poor records who make it usually because they're in a poor division, and they've managed to scrape out of that on top. I think PFF did some analysis, and there's kind of an increase of teams with like 500 records who are essentially scraping into the playoffs, which is due to the divisions that they're in. Thinking some like the Washington football team in 2020, in what was a pretty horrendous division that year, managed to scrape in. And I think it just kind of like dilutes the quality of the playoff football that we see, because we have these teams and ordinarily they tend to go off at the first hurdle. We do get some occasional surprises, but more often than not they fail at the first hurdle. And one of the other things I was thinking about was it kind of reduces the chances of teams who, once they clinch the division, once we get to that time of year where the division's clinched, the performances just basically drop off. We either see a lot of teams resting players, or the players that are playing, you can just imagine in the back of their mind that they're at 70%. They don't want to make those tackles where they could potentially get injured, knowing that they've got playoff games coming up. And I think as well, it's important to think about it in like the fairness element, and like across the league, when you've got teams who are in that position who then are impacting other games that potentially would cost other teams playoff spots. So it does bring that sort of fairness of the league into question. And one of the things I was thinking about as well was a playoff format where we potentially have sort of 6 teams from each conference. The top 2 get a bye week, and it kind of keeps that entire season up. Obviously, you will still have poor teams, but if they're that poor, they probably wouldn't be anywhere near the division anyway. And then one of the other thoughts I had was wildcard games. So, and I'd never really thought about this either, but we have wildcard teams who play, who are sometimes even have losing records, who end up with home field advantage, purely because they've won the division. And some that also doesn't sit right with me. So yeah, I think there's quite a few points there of why it could be a good idea. But sorry, Sam, if I've upset you, or if I've basically thought exactly what you thought. Happy days.
Thank you, Shaun. Ollie, do you want to start your argument against this?
Yeah, so first and foremost, I think teams earn the right to make the playoffs by winning their division. Teams play 6 division games in a season, compared to 6 games against teams in the same conference, and then 5 non-conference games. So that's over 35% of the games that you play in a season is against your division opponents. So when you play the same amount of games against your division as you do against the rest of the conference as well, I think you get a good representation of how good you are in your division as well within the conference as a whole. And I mean, since the NFL changed the seeding format to in 1975, 92% of Super Bowl winners won their division. And yes, I understand that's obviously a misdrew stat with more division winners making the playoffs than the wildcard teams, and the home field advantage. But that's still a pretty big gap, and I think again just kind of furthers my point of why they earn their right to make the playoffs. I think it also offers a clearer path to the playoffs. I mean, every team knows that if you win your division, you make the playoffs. You haven't got to rely on a kind of nitpicking, tiebreaker situation. If you went to a just 7 best records go through, that could result with 7 teams on the same record and all the tiebreakers that go into that. And I think finally, just it incentivizes the division games and just keeps the interest in the divisions and the division rivalries as well. If you take that away from them, I just don't think you kind of get that same feeling within the divisions and the historical aspects of those divisions. And I think finally, to the idea that it's unfair that these division winners, make the playoffs with bad records or losing records. There's only ever been 6 teams that have made the playoffs with a losing record, and 2 of those teams were the Browns and Lions. Shout out Fletch in 1982. And they didn't even win their division. They only made the playoffs because it was such a strike-shortened season, and they made the playoffs that year because they expanded the amount of teams. So technically, there's only been 4 teams that have ever won their division with a losing record and made the playoffs in NFL history, which just shows how rare it is. And that was the Seahawks in 2010, Panthers in 2014, Commanders, like Shaun said, in 2020, and the Buccaneers in 2022. And the Panthers and Seahawks actually won their wildcard game.
Beastquake. Come on. They beat the Saints, man.
Yeah,
the Seahawks beat the
exactly.
Saints.
So, and
one of the best touchdowns ever.
Yeah. And with the Panthers beating the Cardinals that year. And I mean, even the Commanders, they lost the game, but they had the ball with 2.5 minutes left and had a chance to tie that game at the end. So when you got, like I said, only 4 division winners have ever made it with a losing record, and 2 of them actually won their first playoff game anyway. So overall, I just think teams do earn their right to make the playoffs by winning their division, and that's proven by the success that the division winners have had in the playoffs. And like I said, you play a large bulk of your games against your division opponents anyway. So it kind of just your record in that division reflects your record within the conference as a whole. So yeah, I think, and like I said, with the argument of it's unfair, I think it's so rare that it happens that I don't think it's enough to make it worth changing.
I think you're right, Oli, in the fact that, what you said about the Commanders or whatever. They actually were the team that were the closest to beating the Bucks that year anyway. I mean, throughout the playoffs, they bludgeoned everyone else, including my Chiefs. So, yeah.
Yeah, I personally think there's no point having divisions if you're not going to use them as people have. You win because of a divisional, like winning your division. You may as well just scrap divisions altogether, in my opinion, if you're not going to have that as an advantage to being good in that division or being bad. I mean, obviously, I would say there's not been many that have done it anyway, but I just think, I think you watch some of the games and you think, yeah, you're playing them 6 times a year. So if you lose those 6 games, right? You could be 0-6, but then you could win, or you could lose or you could be 6-0 in your division, but then lose every other single game that you have of that season. You could still make the playoffs because you've just won 6 of those games. You're the best in your division, so there is a right that you deserve to get into those playoffs because of that. But I suppose just sort of as a if they were to decide to get rid of that, what would you like to see as a alternative? If they decided to scrap that, what would be a worthy replacement for not having divisional winners get an
maybe.
I mean, I'd be willing to compromise on maybe not giving them the home field advantage. So the 4 division winners make the playoffs irregardless, but then you do the seeding based on records rather than division the division winners. But I don't think it's fair to, like I said, to get rid of. And this is not just as I was drawn this question. I personally believe that you shouldn't get rid of the reward that you get for winning your division.
Or you could have
No,
it so that the top two teams from each division, if they got like a similar record or something, they play each other to see who wins the division or something like that. Do you know, like the top two records in a division play each other like in an almost final thing to see who gets the seeding.
I'd actually noted on mine, I don't know, I was arguing for, but one of the points I'd actually made was about the home advantage and doing that in a different way as well. So it's a good point that you've made. I'd actually noted that myself. I'd just also like to reference what Chapman said about these being assigned. Despite my arguing for it, a lot of the things you said I 100% agree with. I do enjoy the divisional rivalries, but I do think there's maybe a middle ground there somewhere if we looked at it.
I agree with what you said, Sean, about the fact, you know, when someone wins their division and then for the next 3 weeks they play like the games don't mean as much, which kind of takes away from it a bit. Like I understand that, you know, obviously they've wrapped up the division, they're getting ready for the playoffs or whatever, but it kind of takes away somewhat from the spectacle of it.
Yeah, 100%. And like you say, depending on who they're playing, that could also have other implications, which maybe there's a bit of unbalance there. I think it's about just trying to get the season to mean something right up till the very end. And I think m most recent seasons have actually kind of been pretty much like that. And we've seen a bit of a swing in that direction as well. Anything we can do to make that the case, I'm all for, definitely.
I think one of the things that we've started to see more, well, is obviously you have those divisional rival games that tend to be that final game, which I do think even if, yeah, maybe for sort of teams that like, I think as a probably a key example was it the Eagles last, not this season, just gone the season before, they played their final game against the Giants and pretty much fielded a completely like different team for that whole game. And I think, yeah, fair enough. They obviously they do have a rivalry in that, but I think maybe there needs to be a bit more prediction in who they like, almost like, you know, like generally as the season goes on or as before the season starts, you tend to be able to gauge who's going to necessarily be a good team and who may have a struggling season. Maybe they need to do something that's a bit more, I don't want to say fixing the schedule, but maybe putting those games where it's like somewhere like in most recent years, the Eagles and the Cowboys at that final week. Give it a bit more of a zing because those two teams are doing really well, and maybe have the two teams that they think maybe aren't going to do as well playing each other, and it's like a case of who's going to play for last place sort of thing. So it just creates that little bit more of an element to the games rather than it being a bit of a dead rubber.
I mean, ironically, that Eagles game you referenced, I thought that was a great decision to field a really poor team, to be honest. It worked out brilliantly for us, so I'll take that.
I think as well it depends on. I mean, as a Browns fan in quite a fairly historic division, that probably influences my decision as well. That I want to preserve what we have within that division, and changing that would just kind of, I don't know, maybe lose a bit of that kind of experience that you have within the division.
It's kind of how you think about it as well. I know we've kind of phrased it up, should we have it or get rid of it, but like it's more the outcome of what it means is what we're more talking about as opposed to should we have divisions or should we haven't have divisions. So I guess we could still keep the divisions, but yeah, like you say, that the biggest reward of winning your division is getting that playoff spot. So it would have to be something pretty close to that if we were going to keep the divisions, if we were going to change it. But
I mean, we've never even won our division, so you'd think that I'd want to change the way that it's done. And obviously, the 2 years that we've made the playoffs in the last 4 years, even though we were, we finished 11-5, 11-6, it was still went down to the last week or two. Whereas obviously, if we were, if the format was different, then maybe we would have clinched it a bit earlier, and it would have been as bad. But like I said, I still agree with the divisions as how they are.
Well, thank you guys for that. We'll move on to the next one, which is a slightly different. So we're moving sort of away from talking about divisions and things like that to something that's, I know that probably is going to be an interesting topic for Fletch to discuss, given his team is the one that does this the most, I would say, or at least up there. But the next topic is 4th and 3, opponent's half, midway through the fourth, losing a close game. Do you go for it? We'll start with Fletch, who's arguing against. So this should be quite interesting.
Yeah, so obviously you don't go for it. If you're in a close game, and again, I think we used kind of as an example for this, it's the Lions in the fourth quarter of the NFC Championship game. We're down by, I think at this point we were down by 3 points. We hadn't put any points up in the second half, despite leading really well in the first half. Offense was struggling. I think we've gone punt, fumble, punt, punt. At that point, you take whatever points you get given. Whatever you can get sent, you take those points. I get sometimes you might need a bit of momentum, but I think what that does is your offense on 4th and 3 is not going to walk over to the sidelines and give up on you when you decide not to go for it and take the field goal. But what message does that send to your kicker if you don't trust him to make a 35, 40-yard field goal in a clutch moment? I think if you look at it one way or the other, one of them sends a really bad message to a very key player or someone who could be a key player at any given moment. There's not really any message at all. I get that, analytics or not, there are some times, especially in certain games, where at the end of the day, you take the point. You need to take the point. And again, as much as, to use that example, I remember being sat there and thinking, no, please, just for once, please take the point. Because you can argue momentum, but actually getting points on the board would also, I would generally believe that, especially at that point when you struggled so much through the second half, getting any points on the board will get you some momentum, whereas stalling on 4th down for the second time proved to just be a bit too much for us to handle in that moment in time. So in short, there may be some situations where, obviously, I don't think Oli's going to argue with me that on 4th and 13 on your own 2-yard line, yeah, okay, no, don't go for it there. Please don't. I think we can all agree on that one. But even in some of those situations, going for it where the risk and reward is so high, take the points, please. Dan, if you're listening, please take the point.
I mean, I suppose to champion the analytics side of it, I'll try not to bore you with some of the numbers I've got here. But I mean, in the end of the day, I know people hate the idea of analytics in the NFL when it's kind of a touchy subject. But according to the numbers within those analytical models, more often than not, you are statistically more likely to win a game by going for it on 4th down than you are by going for a field goal. You look at Bruins Analytics, which is a major sports analytics company. They analyze data in the last 10 years across pretty much every 4th down decision, and concluded that, you are more likely to win the game by going for it on 4th down than you are by attempting a field goal in those situations. And so with the increased kind of win probability of going for it on 4th down versus kicking a field goal, that outweighs the difference in the success rate between the two situations. And obviously going back to this specific example that we're using, 4th and 3 on the 30-yard, their 30-yard line down 3, did a little dive into it, and since 2013, teams have converted 50.8% of their 4th down conversions and 61.2% of 4th and anything that was 3 yards or less. Whereas when you look at a field goal, which would be a 47-yard field goal from that situation, that's an average of 73% since 2010 success rate. So that's only a 12% success rate difference. And when you kind of factor in the added win probabilities that you get with going for it on 4th down, again, it does analytically, statistically, whatever you want to call it, essentially prove that going for it is the right decision. And I know obviously the people that want to take the points will, they'll argue for that, but that also doesn't guarantee you're going to make the field goal. Obviously, you can miss field goals. That does happen. And in this situation that we've obviously highlighted, a field goal would tie the game, and you give them the ball back with 6 minutes left. Whereas if you go for it and convert it, you have a potential to go and lead by 4 points and take a lot more time off the clock. So I just think at the end of the day, it's one of those things where people hate the outcome and they hate, if it fails. But I think they should be judging something that is actually controllable, not uncontrollable, and focus on, was that the correct decision? And like I think that I've just kind of shown, and as like I said, the numbers do prove that it is the correct decision more often than not to go for it on.
Brilliant. I mean, it's the one thing I would bring up, and this is what I thought I'd put this to both of you. There was, and it's a bit of an odd one. There was a stat there was an episode on young Sheldon where they did a piece, and Sheldon talks about.
I've seen it. Yeah.
As he said something like, "Is it 50% of the time you go down?" I don't know how much truth there is in the information, but I think he said something like 50% of people who take that fourth down and actually go for it tend to score on that drive, but it's something like of the punts, 77% of the everything after that, and the other team go and win. It's like 77%.
Yeah.
I don't know how truthful that is.
Yeah.
I'm just wondering, that stat obviously there. Does it mean that should we be focusing on teams maybe working using all four of those downs more often? Should we be expecting teams to maybe be looking at those stats and going for it more? Because we do, obviously, like we say, we do see a lot of teams that will just take the field goal, get out of there and try and recover the ball. But do we think we should be seeing more teams going for it on that?
I mean, I think it's I'm for against it, as in regards to like the excitement levels kind of thing of the game. So it's always good to see teams go for it on 4th and 2, 4th and 1, 4th and 3, etc. But I guess it's dependent on the scenario that they're currently in. Now, I'm going to take from a Patriots perspective. I always felt that Bill wasn't, what's the word I'm looking for? He wasn't as ruthless, as in like going for it. Aggressive, yeah, that's the word I was looking for. Aggressive, yeah. Because he knew that he would probably have another chance of having a shot at it and a better opportunity. So he would rely on his defense to be able to then come up with the ball again in the set. So, but yeah, I'm for like the excitement side of things, but it depended on which scenario, I guess.
I'm for it with the
I think
4th
going
and
to your.
3.
Oh, sorry, you go, Tom.
Sorry, Ali. For like 4th and 3, I think it's, as Ollie's pointed out, with all the stats and stuff to back it up, like it seems like the kind of right thing to do. Obviously, as David said as well, the excitement level of, if you get it, or if you don't get it, the heightened anticipation at that moment is obviously massive. When it's longer than that, when it's like 4th and 7 and stuff like that, then it's a totally different ball game, as the Chargers found out with Brandon Staley. But yeah, I think there's arguments for and against it, to be honest.
I was just going to throw on to what David was saying about, depending on the situation. I think that is a lot of things that people get lost in. They think there's one analytical model that is used amongst all teams, and that's determining every factor. But I've listened to many different GMs and coaches talk about, how they do factor in situational aspects into their analytical models. So I think it's important to, note that that is taken into account. These what down it is, if a player's injured, whatever, they do put these into their models. And I think going back to what Fletch said as well, with obviously in the Lions game, yes, it's that situation specifically. You had Michael Badley, who's made one 40-yard field goal all year that season. I think his career 40 yards and plus field goal percentage is 68%, which is not great, versus the Lions that were, I think, in the high 80s of 4th and 3 and anything less that season. So that's a higher, that's an even easier. That's why that was so easy for me, because you look at that situation and go, well, you've got a higher success rate as well as win probability. So I have no problem with Dan Campbell going for that 4th and 3 in the NFC Championship game.
So I really hope you've realised just what gritted teeth I'm about to say this through. But sometimes you've just got to trust your defence that they will make a stop for you. And you've got to put that trust in the rest of your team. For me, it screams in two ways. That screams, I don't trust you to the kicker. And however rightly or wrongly towards that Lions defence, we'll talk about that another day, maybe never again. But you tell your defence, I don't trust you. I don't trust you to do enough to help us to win this game. You know, granted, again, we were struggling in that game. The momentum was against us. But that's why, for me, you need to, and maybe you want to keep that defense off the field a little bit longer. I don't know why you would want to keep that defense off the field, but for me, it's partly turning around to half of your team and saying, I don't trust you to do enough here. The only people I realistically trust right now is the ball in Jared Goff's hands, Amon-Ra St. Brown, Josh Reynolds, and Ben Johnson. They're the only 4 people, right? Because let's face it, we're not going to, you're not launching a ball to J-Mo on 4th and 3. That's not happening. And you're not bringing out Craig Reynolds for it. So realistically, that's what's happening. And you're saying, I don't trust you, kicker. I don't trust your defense. I don't trust you, Aaron Glenn. I only trust these 4 people to get this job done for me today. And I don't want to be the head coach who has to walk into a locker room with 2/3 of my team pissed at me because I stuck my middle finger up at him and said, I don't trust you.
The thing is,
my biggest thing with that, my biggest thing with just going, I know we can go on about this game for hours, but my biggest thing for that was it's probably the same in general, but I just think situational awareness is a massive thing, and I think in that game, the first one that you went for was dumb, given the fact you were so many points up. The second one, I understand. But the first one, you've got to go for it. You've got to just take your points. You're against one of the best defenses in the league. You're against one of the best offenses in the league at the time. You just got to take your medicine and go for it. And like you say, I do think there is that element of you've got to be able to say, right, okay, yeah, we only got 3 points. It's up to you, defense, now to step up and show what you're made of.
Just onto that point with the defense, though, I feel like I'm also telling the defense that I trust them by going for it, because I'm basically saying if I don't make this, I'm also then trusting you to then get the stop, you know, in negative field position or whatever it is. I don't think, and I mean, these are grown men. If they're really going to be upset about, you know, a coach going for it and them thinking, oh, that means he doesn't trust us, then that's not the kind of players that I'd want anyway. So I don't think it does send that message, but I do understand the point you're making, but I just personally don't think it entirely does send that message.
And just real quickly, don't forget, this game is played on grass, not on paper. So stats don't really matter. End of the day.
That's what I was just going to say. I think this is one of the ones where no matter what the analytics and what sort of data points they use in the modelling, it's very much an on-field feeling decision at the time, situational. There's so many things that come into play at that moment that, yes, you could analyse later on and you could put in models and say, if you'd have done this, it would have went this way. But I think it's always going to be one of them things that's made, a decision's made in the moment, in the feeling, by the coach, and that's the way it'll always be, regardless of whether the stats say you should or you shouldn't.
And as we've said, you don't talk about the ones, the 80% or whatever it was that they actually managed to do throughout the year. You talk about the ones that didn't happen that cost them. So, yeah, I think that like you say, there's always going to be arguments of for or against with that one, and that's why it's a good one to have in there. Right, we'll move on to the next one, and Fletch, you're going to be starting this one up again, and we're going with what the argument is the cornerback position the hardest position in the NFL? Fletch, off you go. For this.
Well, it's the hardest non-quarterback position in the NFL, and I would say that every position, well, you start off with the rainbow stuff. Every position comes with its challenges and skill sets and all that sort of stuff. Every position is valuable, all that sort of stuff. But I think that there are various points to this game. The quarterback kind of takes it all for the most part. The quarterback's the most mentally tough position to play. There are other positions like your offensive line and your defensive lines. They're physically tough. You are getting beaten up all game. I get it. Linebackers, you've got to be quite mentally tough. They're called the quarterback to the defense for a reason. It's a mental. You've got to be on mentally all the time. But I just think for a cornerback, you have to have a lot of that same mental toughness that a linebacker has, and a lot of that same the ability to read a game, because you're constantly reacting. It's one of the defense is always constantly having to be in a position of reacting, but maybe your defensive line, they just get to run at people, they just get to go and attack, and that's great. But your cornerbacks are constantly having to react, keep on it mentally, whilst also being physically on it as well, going up against it. Imagine trying to defend against someone like a Tyreek Hill. You've got to continuously be as fast as him, continuously keep up with whatever route he's going to run. And someone like Tyreek Hill is going to utilize his full route tree and his relationship with his quarterback, and maybe not run the route that you think he's going to run, and maybe even go off script a little bit. You've got to keep that mental toughness, the physical toughness. It, for me, encapsulates just about a bit of everything that you need in the game on defense. It goes, what I say, from the ability to stay mentally tough, to read the game, to stay physically tough, to stay physically fit, active. It takes everything to be good at corner. And we watch, again, look, going back to the kind of previous segment, I'm alive. I've seen what bad cornerback play looks like this last year. And why there are certain cornerbacks are only realistically good in certain situations because they don't have to be a true elite corner. And looking at your Sauce Gardners of the NFL, it's very, very few players can do that at all, and that's why they're so highly sought after constantly.
Thank you, Fletch. That's me arguing against this, and I have I should have mentioned at the start, this is the hardest non-QB position. I think we all probably would agree that the QB is the hardest position. For me, the cornerback is a very difficult position. I think on the defensive side, it probably is the hardest position. But for me, I would say the blindside tackle is the hardest position in the league. And there are a few reasons why. I think the biggest thing is if you're not on it every single game, you're not ready to take that edge rusher on, your QB is getting sacked. That could either be potential injury, a fumble. It ruins the game on the offense for me. So if you don't have a decent blindside tackle, then it doesn't matter how good your QB is. It doesn't matter how good your wide receivers are, or that your offense is just completely shot. When you think about the physicality of being any side tackle, mainly sort of the left tackle in terms of sort of the QB that we have, but that blindside tackle. Majority of the tackles we have are over 300 pounds. They're not the quickest, but they are the strongest. The guys they're coming up against, if I just give some examples, Hutchinson, Garrett, Bosa, Crosby and Watt. They are some of the most athletic, biggest men you'll get running at you. If you're not quick, as well as being built like a brick shithouse and just being the ability to have that quick movement, they'll get round you. They'll get round you and they'll sack that quarterback and they'll ruin the whole offense. So for me, I think that position, and again, you don't get many blindside tackles that are what we maybe sort of see as elite tackles. I think you probably, off the top of my head, the ones I can think of, obviously the biggest one is Trent Williams at San Francisco, sorry. Is sort of being that elite player that sort of I think they are few and far between in terms of that tackle, and that's why when we do start to see a good tackle coming into the league, they are always snapped up relatively high in the draft. So for me, I would say that that tackle is the hardest position in the league, just purely because of who you're always up against, and also the ramifications of, if you are not good at that position, the ramifications on the offense that it can cause to the team's ability to be able to score points.
So I'm going to give one little rebuttal to this, and it's the way the NFL is going at the moment. If you've got Patrick Mahomes behind centre, I don't think, as a whole, or your Lamar Jacksons of the world, that it's important. But should your blindside tackle not quite, just kind of miss the block, or whatever, they're going to get away. Patrick Mahomes is going to get away. Lamar Jackson's going to get away. Whereas I think you look at many plays every week in the NFL, there is a highlight reel of touchdowns that you see. If your cornerback slightly misses a cut, that's a touchdown, and that's that. Whereas, so I would just as a rebuttal, I would throw out there that as well, it is, I get it. You want to have the best lock. You know, if you've got a 1,000-pound bike, you want to put a 1,000-pound lock on it. You want to give the best possible protection to your best possible asset. I get that, but the more you look at the way QBs are going, they can escape that pressure, they can get out of it, and they can do a lot of that on their own now. Whereas, you know, if a cornerback messes up, who's there to help them? There's no kind of equivalent of a QB running out of the pocket and escaping pressure in that situation. That's a touchdown, and you've just lost it. You're down 6 points now.
Yeah, I would agree with Fletch on that. Not that I don't think that the left tackle is not important, but you know, speaking from experience with the Chiefs this year, you know, they both had both the tackles were very inconsistent. Like, you know, they're getting beaten quite a lot. Mahomes did get sacked a few times, and then, you know, the Chiefs still went on to win the Super Bowl despite that inconsistent play on the line. Whereas, yeah, I agree with Fletch that, you know, at the cornerback position, you know, having a lockdown corner, a player that can, you know, have a quick memory as well. You know, if they get beaten, then they have to come back the next play and, you know, play man to man or, you know, cover well. Like, that's such a hard thing to do, knowing that, oh, I've just been beaten for a 60-yard touchdown. Now I've just got to go back and play the game as if nothing's happened. So, yeah, I would agree from that sense that a corner is more important.
I kind of agree as well, but I also think...
I think just to support Sam, just for one argument, you know, just to play devil advocate, I mean, if your corner is, you know, it doesn't matter how good he is at covering, if the quarterback can't get him the ball because he's, you know, on his backside every 1.5 seconds, like some of these edge rushers that, you know, how quickly they can get to the quarterback. It doesn't matter how agile you are. If you've got Myles Garrett coming off the edge within 2 seconds, you know, you're on your backside. So I suppose that would be the counter argument for why maybe not so much harder, but a more important position, maybe, I suppose. But yeah, just trying to play devil advocate and give Sam one bit of support for his argument in that one.
As a Giants fan, I can tell you the tackle is a very important position because we basically don't have any, and our quarterback spends most of his time with bum. So yeah, I would probably lean towards that one purely because I'm sick of seeing my quarterbacks getting sacked constantly. But I think there's valid arguments for both.
I think you made a really good argument, Sam, in terms of, you know, explaining like how it can be so influential in blowing up a play or blowing up a game. So I think it was very well argued.
I think from a official's point of view, I think as well for QBs, it's probably the hardest position for them to officiate against, because if your normal instances, if you get burnt by a wide receiver, you're gonna grab and you're gonna create flags on that. So I think it's probably to a point of where do you allow them to play football or you pull the flag for grabbing. So I think wide receiver is quite an important asset to the team as well, because I think without wide receivers you can't create no touchdowns and can't win games. But
I don't know, speaking of Lamar Jackson, he showed this year he could do even that bit on his own.
Yeah, that's true.
I think it's just important to remember. Obviously, the topic was hardest position.
Yeah.
I think it's in terms of probably the most important position. We're probably looking at. I mean, personally, for important position, I would say well, the O line as a whole in terms of important position. The only reason I say the tackle is the hardest is more of a physical reason. You're completely mismatched against the guy you're up against. In most cases, it's a much leaner, more agile, more quicker player, and you are generally a bigger guy who is generally slower. So I think to be able to have the skills in order to be able to prevent someone who is a lot quicker than you from getting to the quarterback, it just shows me that there's a complete mismatch in terms of abilities with those positions. Whereas I think a good cornerback with all the right assets in terms of skills assets could easily match up against a wide receiver. Now, yes, there is the more mental element of if he beats you, you could potentially you could lose it mentally, where you think, well, he's just going to do that every single time. I mean, if you ever see some of the cornerbacks that come up against Tyreek Hill and the absolute mayhem that he causes mentally for some people, I mean, you're going to have that. But I just think in terms of the hardest in terms of physical difference and makeup of a player, that's why I went with the left tackle. But
I think just quickly, as you said as well, with the importance of the position, obviously someone once said that the three most important aspects of football are the quarterback, protecting the quarterback and getting to the quarterback. So I think that kind of exemplifies your point of, the importance of that tackle position.
My last thing I'll say as a quick is an elite offensive line got us to the NFC Championship game, but a half-decent cornerback would have taken us to the Super Bowl. Mic drop.
Right. Well, we are taking probably a bit longer than we thought we were going to, but we'll keep going. We'll sort of try and I don't want to take time away from other people who they want to have their arguments. So we'll move on to the next one. Should there be or is there a need to have a complete reform of how officiating is done in the NFL? I think this is probably quite a hot topic for a lot of people, especially with some of the things we've seen over the recent years. So, Shaun, do you want to start off with your reason for against? So it's more about the total reformation of how officiating is done, not just certain aspects. I suppose, just so we can be clear on what we're talking about.
I'll go first, and just to preface it with, I 100% believe every word I'm about to say, and definitely don't think we should do anything about the referees in the NFL. So I think I'll probably start with the accuracy that does remain. So I think what we get sort of hung up quite a lot about, like big moments, big decisions that go wrong, ones that have real impact on sort of outcomes of games, playoff implications, and the like. But the amount of decisions that they make, game by game, week by week, season by season, the overall accuracy is still there. I mean, if you believe the stats that they put out last year, they reckon that the accuracy of the refs was like 98.9%. I mean, we have to trust that those figures are accurate. But if we use them statistics, then overall they are doing what they're on the field to do. If we were looking at sort of doing a full reform, and the most consensus on this is involving technology more, removing some of the human element, removing that element of bad decision making, and try and go to sort of automation and using all the technology we have available to us today. There's no guarantee that would work. Obviously, they would do trials beforehand, and they would do all of the different things the due diligence they would need to do. But I think some of the sort of arguments for making this reform is on the basis that this technology would work, and it would be everything that we would want it to be, and we wouldn't get these decisions anymore. And that kind of leads into the timing. So I'd seen a stat earlier today that on average an instant replay review adds around 1 minute 55 seconds to the game. And if we went down the road of having more of these reviews, more of these technology and automation, we'd potentially then have more of that as well. And that would really interrupt the flow of the game. And I think everyone in this room probably had somebody from the UK say to them that they don't like the NFL because there's too many stoppages, there's too many delays of games, there's too many adverts, the usual things you hear. And it would be a concern that if we went down a more technological route, we would end up with more of those delays. I think also as well, yeah, probably the one I'm looking at here around the Rams Saints game in the I think it was the 2018-19 season. We know everyone knows what call I'm talking about. The one that led to the temporary rule change. Um, how much drama did that add to the game? How much sort of everyone went to work the next day and spoke about that? It was a bad decision. Everyone knew it was a bad decision, but the interest that it piqued and probably all the videos and the social media and that dramatic effect that that had, whilst I would like the decisions to be correct every time, it does add that uncertainty. It does add that element that you wouldn't get if we were going to go down this road of potentially having sort of a much more accurate officiating. So yeah, I think that those would be the reasons I would argue for not doing the reform. I think.
I guess to jump on that from the other side, which is hard to because you just did a pretty compelling argument. But from the standpoint of bringing the technology in, it takes out that that subjective, the point of view of those referees making those decisions based on snap judgment. Whereas obviously I know what you say and that it will add time to the game, but actually coming out like with the right decisions based on what is actually seen, like I think would greatly impact the game in the right way. And then, yeah, just in the case of also, with how they bring out the chains and stuff like that for when they do first downs and things like that, actually bringing in technology that shows when it is supposed to be a first down, because there's definitely been instances in the, but I think there was the game who was it? It was the Steelers last year where it was like questionable whether they had actually got the fourth down to more or less ice the game, but they just had to go with it because it was what the line judge had said. So I think bringing in the technology would just bring that clarity, which I think is really important for the game. So I guess those are the sort of things that I would argue why like a reform of the game and having coaches that are full time, like not part time. Just it wouldn't be as much inconsistency. But yeah, those are sort of the arguments I would bring.
Yeah, I think you're right, and I think I mean I know I'd argued against it, but I think it's probably again kind of some of the other ones we spoke about. There's definitely a middle ground there. There's things that we could do without a massive, huge, full reform. There's definitely just tweaks that could be made, like what you've said about the chains and stuff. There's definitely things that could be done that way. I think we just need to err on the side of caution. I mean, if we look at our football and soccer, how horrific VAR is for the most part. I mean, on paper it sounds brilliant that we get decisions right every time, but there's still always going to be that human element at the end of the technology. So it's kind of, do you replace one bad thing with another bad thing? So yeah, it's definitely there's definitely room for improvement. I just think we have to be careful of not sort of grass is not always greener on the other side type
I kind
mentality.
of, yeah, I agree. I think some sort of middle ground would be where it's best, because as you say, yeah, VAR is an absolute nightmare. You're giving it to someone else who's so far away from the situation of the game or whatever, and they're just making a decision based on that. So yeah, it would be yeah, so some sort of, yeah, in the middle there.
Brilliant. Thank you, guys. And then we'll come on to our final topic on the 2 minute grills, which have, to be honest, I think more turned into 10 minute 10 minute grills, but that's by the by. And we're going to look at, should the NFL adopt a lottery system when it comes to the, I suppose, the draft, really. We'll start with the argument for. So Chapman, if you want to head with this one.
Look, the draft has evolved over years, and it's getting stale. Let's just be honest. And what could be really exciting is, much like the NBA and the NHL do, we do a lottery draft. And what that would help us on a multiple levels, but the biggest one being the NFL is the world's greatest TV show, and it would give us yet another TV show in the drama that unfolds in the off season for the NFL. It would be exciting because we would have a number of teams who all would have losing records, but you wouldn't know who would be getting that first draft pick. And let me sell it to you this way. What if we were going into the draft in 2 weeks and the night before, we don't know who's going to get Caleb Williams? And there's 5 teams and they all have little ping pong balls or however cool the NFL does it. And the night before we find out that Caleb Williams is going to, let's say, the New England Patriots because they get the first draft. Oh, God, forgive us. But anyway, that would be exciting to me. The other thing is, I think as the NFL grows, we're going to get more. There's just going to be more ways to tank, and we're gonna and this would be a way to help us avoid that, because I do think we're going to come to a day where that might start happening for great college quarterbacks, especially because we all know that's the most coveted part of the draft. And lastly, what I would say is, I think it would be just an interesting way to get more interest into the draft, because we kind of know basically even before the Super Bowl who the top 15 picks are or where they're gonna go, and we sit and talk about it and talk about trade backs, blah blah blah. But what if that was all thrown up into the air and we found out the night before, at least for the first, let's say, 5 picks, and then everything else goes chalk sort of after that? I think it'd be great. I think the draft has needed some sort of injection of life and to make it different, and I think this would be a great way to do it.
Yeah, I get the Chapman's point of view in regards to the whole excitement element to it, all that, but I'm all for keeping it the way it is. I think it's very traditional and very NFL the way it's done at the moment. I enjoy, like from a fan and personal perspective, I enjoy watching the 3 days as they evolve, strategically how teams are going to be picking each player for their needed positions. I'm all for as well. How the draft works is how the bottom team's done the worst. So you're trying to kind of like make the worst team slightly better in some kind of aspect. So you're kind of trying to find that middle ground in the NFL, or the divisions trying to balance themselves out, rather than getting, 5 draft picks and you're getting the 5 top prospect players, which in a way means that that team could then skyfly, rocket through the season and win every single game. So I'm more traditionally keeping the draft the way it is, but I do see Chapman's point of view of trying to maybe make it a little bit more excitement in the draft perspective point of view. So yeah, so there's a bit of argument from back and forth there.
So would we be doing a draft as in just the non-playoff teams, the draft lottery just for them, and then obviously the same format for the rest of the teams that obviously make the playoffs?
Each one of them has, so Caleb Williams going 1 to the Bears or whatever. It would be interesting.
Yeah, like that'd be
how that wouldn't be decided until then, especially as Chapman said, like if it was the top 5 picks as well, definitely that kind of excitement level, that would be really interesting, I think.
I do quite like the idea of it, to be honest. Like that, 'cause I never really thought of it like how it would be more of an entertainment thing, but I also think it would be a fun way of, like you say, that you don't know who's going to be getting that number 1 pick. So there's all these people doing mock lotteries, and then who they're going to pick, and I think it just adds that little extra element. But I think it also would cause a little bit, especially if you only limited it to a certain amount, you weren't doing the whole, like say the top 5. It would also, the only counter argument I would say with it is, I think you would see a significant drop off in trades for those 5 teams, and also a significant drop off in, or I just think there wouldn't be as many trades with those teams. But also on the flip side, you may see them going into free agency a lot more. Like we've had with this season, we've had a lot of free agencies going. You might see them going into more free agency, and more teams do like what the Bears have done of, okay, we'll try and pick a team based upon who we think we're going to get, and then they go and get the pick that they want, and then they end up having to deal with someone like losing potentially out on Caleb or Drake May or whoever it would be in that particular draft. But then you could also then see afterwards where trades like the first pick going again a lot more quickly. So it could be. There are pros and.
I'm assuming we would lose that aspect of the trades, because I'm not 100% down on how the NBA works, but I'm assuming that you wouldn't be able to trade for, like the NFL does now on draft day. You can trade your picks and X, Y, and Z, but can you do
You can
that
trade your picks.
in NBA
Doesn't
as
matter.
well?
Yeah.
Oh, okay. I don't see that.
Yeah, you can trade them as the same way, but I mean they're valued a lot less.
But Sam, to go back to you saying, well, you don't know who you're going to get if you're in this 5 group, top 5 and blah blah. Well, my answer to that is don't suck. Don't be a bottom 5 team and putting yourself in a position to be there. That's sort of the thing. And so
I think it would.
sorry about
I think
your
it
luck.
would be like incredible for the fans, incredible for everyone involved outside of the organization. Within the organization, it would be absolute chaos. I can imagine like GMs running around like headless chickens trying to decide what they're going to do, and the absolute chaos that would come. I mean, I feel like it would make a great new draft day film. That would be unbelievable if that was the case. But yeah, it would be a nightmare for them.
Well, I mean that's probably true, and I think obviously having a footing and where you're going to draft is really helpful, and kind of knowing how the board's going to fall this way or that. But I mean, they do this for a living, and so they have a contingency of like, okay, here's our board. If this guy goes, then it's this guy. If this guy, so in some ways. I don't know how much that would change, but what I would say, Shaun, to what Sam was saying earlier, I think you're like everything you're doing pre-draft in terms of free agency and stuff, really, that would be much more difficult because you like you said, Sam, if you're building a team for one thing and you don't know, but again, don't stink. So.
But then as well, even in that case, like you could decide to think, like even just with the draft as it is now, you could be thinking, oh, this team's going to go for this player, and then they decide not to. And that's the player that you wanted. So now you're in a position where you're going to have to trade down or up anyway. So I do think that it may not have that much of an impact, but I personally I think it'll change how people will approach.
Ironically, we've spoken about the top 5 being the one where we would like to see it happen. That one's probably the top 5 is probably the ones that would have the most impact on. Because once you start getting sort of probably more after the top 10, then it starts becoming a bit unclear anyway. Just every year, things happen that surprise us. But usually it's the top 5 where you kind of have a good idea. Very rarely do we get surprised, unless the Giants just do random stuff like they like to do. So yeah, it's funny that we pick the top 5, but that's the one that would cause the most chaos.
I mean, I want to throw this out as someone who follows Detroit sports and has followed the Pistons now, kind of loosely for a few years. The Pistons have been by far the worst NBA team for the past 2 seasons, and it's not close. I don't think it's particularly close. And the chances are this year, the Pistons will not get the top pick in the draft. They did not get the top pick in the draft before. Now, maybe it's punishment for just completely ruining 3 years of Cade Cunningham's career, but it's also, it seems a bit silly to me to have a clear worst team in the league that doesn't get the top pick, because then I think that to a certain extent just keeps them as a bottom feeder for a while. But I do agree. I know it's not necessarily as simple, but I do agree as somewhat of a Pistons fan. Just don't suck. Stop sucking, and you won't have this problem.
I think that's a good point.
A lot to ask of the Pistons to not suck at the moment, so.
It's a good point.
Get better GM.
Yeah, I think there's
things like
a lot of people who love the sport for what it is. I think the sort of the balance of it is what attracts them, in a lot of times, especially when you look at some different sports, particularly more our side of the pond, where there's kind of these big gaps in quality and stuff. I think it's one of the biggest draws of the NFL is that. I mean, if you look at the Texans, like how bad they were, and all of a sudden now they're going to be right up there. Like, I think if we lost that element in the draft, I think a lot of that comes from the draft, comes from that getting those high picks from being terrible. So you've got to be careful with the whole foundation of the league, just for what would be a bit of fun on draft day.
Brilliant, guys. We've had some great debates on that. One thing I will say, anyone listening, head over to the AAW network on X or Twitter, however you want to call it, and head over to the Hurdle on the Line. And we will be putting up some of these to vote for. So if you want to get involved in those, you want to share your opinions, pop over to the Twitter pages and get involved. They'll be up over the next week or so. Right, we've gone on quite a long episode, but we'll come to the final part, and I just want to sort of throw it out there as a little bit of fun, as we will do most weeks. Is what facts have you got, guys, that you find the strangest NFL facts that you've got, or particular fact? I don't know if anyone wants to start. Just
I got one.
A fact.
Doug Williams has thrown more Super Bowl touchdown passes than the Denver Broncos, which is just a random one. There you go, start it off.
That is pretty good fact, to be honest. I quite like that one. I suppose my fact was that a 30-second advert costs $7 million, which I always think is really, really quite interesting. It's a ridiculous amount of money for a 30-second ad. But
Yeah, I'd had that as not that, but specifically like it had increased by like 65% in like the last 5 years or something like that, like astronomically increased, which is just insane. And I always, I mean, sorry to drag on, but I always find some of the adverts that you see, you think, have they got that money? Do they have that money to pay that? Some of these adverts are pretty terrible, and you think, where's that money come from?
Can you guys tell me who Brett Favre's first pass went to? Who caught Brett Favre's first
Himself.
pass in the NFL? Nice. An oldie but a goodie.
This one's for Chapman. The Carolina Panthers have never had back-to-back winning seasons, but somehow won the NFC South for 3 years in a row.
That's a good one. I did not know that.
I saw that earlier
And
on.
in that run, also went to the Super Bowl.
That's weird.
I've
So
got
easy to think about.
any other facts?
Does anyone know the NFL's perfect season?
Dolphins, is it?
Dolphins, 1972, right?
That's it, yeah.
72.
The Patriots were really close, though, weren't they, at one point?
Lost it by one.
And I think I've seen Patriots fans argue that the Patriots went unbeaten for longer.
But they didn't do the season.
losing the Super Bowl.
Yeah, they lost the Super Bowl.
And no, they didn't do the season, but they went like 16 games unbeaten, whereas the Dolphins only went 14,
Yeah, 14 and
along those lines.
I guess it's harder to do now as well, now with the
The extra game, yeah.
Yep.
I've got one to just throw out. It's more of it, I suppose, see if what people know. What was the age of the youngest Hall of Fame inductee?
Is it 35?
Close, 34.
Oh, it's Gale Sayers.
34. It is Gale Sayers.
Just three quick, random ones. Kind of going back to what Tom said about the Broncos. Tim Tebow is the only quarterback drafted by the Broncos to ever win a playoff game for the team. Thought that was a pretty good one. And obviously everyone thinks Elway, but he was actually drafted by the Baltimore Colts before being traded to Denver. Second one, which is just, I still don't understand how this is even a thing. Chicago Bears have never had a quarterback to throw for either 4,000 yards in a season or, so not at the same time, or either one, 30 touchdowns in a season, which is just, I mean, considering they've existed for 105 seasons, that's pretty insane. And then finally, the Houston Oilers have won their division more recently than my Cleveland Browns. And they haven't existed since 1996, so before I was born. So just a nice one to relish in the pain at the end there. But next year's our year. Nope. Next year's definitely going to be our year. Well, they won the division this year. They won their division. Yep. I'd be more than happy with an AFC Championship game appearance. Obviously, I'd want the Super Bowl as well, but I'll still be happy.
I got one for you for a bit of pain, Fletch. The Detroit Lions have had two separate stretches of 30 years without a playoff win.
That's a cruel
Tom,
one.
you're
That's a
you're
cruel
getting
one.
booted on Monday. P7.
What a way to end the show.
Yes, we will end it there actually, because that's a good way to end it. Brilliant. Another great day chatting and all things NFL. Again, if anyone who's sort of wanted to catch these, are available on Apple and available on Spotify, I believe. But you can also again follow us on any of the socials, mainly on sort of Twitter. Again, check us out, follow us, and keep an eye out on what's coming in the future.